Hello? Hi. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Critical Conversations Out of Many One, Immigration's Hope and Humanity. My name is Christina Grubitz, and I am the curator here at Houston Public Library. This program is in conjunction with the exhibit that's right back there, also called Out of Many One, Portraits of America's Immigrants, and those were all painted by former President George W. Bush. Before we begin our program, I'd like to introduce our special guest, Ariana Lee, Houston's Youth Poet Laureate, who will perform her poem, Homeward Bound.
Hello all, thank you so much Houston Public Library for having me. I wrote this poem after I found out that my great-grandmother had bound feet, and it's about migration and immigration. I hope you enjoy. My tainai had a premonition that I would be a dancer. It happened in a flash, like the white-hot flash of too hot water. Her feet burned, having been soaked in an herbal bath so that they would be malleable. She didn't complain because she was a girl, 4 or 7 or 12, too young, blacking out from pain as her feet were broken into crescent moons and bound tightly. She understood that this was being a woman. She understood because of her mother. She understood she was to be a mother, that bound feet would help her to be a mother. The spots in her vision danced like butterflies. Tainai grew into stillness. The intentional disabling of her feet made her dependent on her husband. Sometimes she thought this life was death, a coffin for her, a separate one for her feet. Pink coffins on my own feet. 2 mothers later, my toes pointed into crescent moons, ribbons tucked neatly. She knew I would be a dancer. I wish I could tell Tainai that the coffins around her great-granddaughter's feet are there by choice, that they're called point shoes, not a pain, but a passion. I wish to fly backwards in time. Arriving with the grace of a monarch butterfly, I'd dance for her. She will say, "Why did you come as a monarch?" I will say, their migration is one of the greatest natural spectacles, that millions of them fly, that the journey is so long no single butterfly makes the northward trip home. Instead, it is the great-grandchildren that hatched in Mexico who return. I want her to understand what I'm really saying. She will ask, "What is Mexico?" I will laugh. I will try to explain the border, all borders, and then immigrants, like her descendants will become. Tainai knew I would be a dancer. "Tell me about the dances," she will say. "Tell me about this ballet." So I'm bound to talk about Madame Butterfly, a famous ballet about my country and the Japanese. And Tainai does not yet know the entirety of what will happen between her country and the Japanese. The ballet ends with Madame killing herself, cutting her bloodline. Tainai is horrified. But don't worry. Look at your great-granddaughter, our family's uncut blood, my unbound feet. Look who found her way home. Thank you very much. Next up, we have another poem for you, and I'm really excited about this one because this is my teammate, Samaya Green. We are on the Metaphor Houston team, which is Houston's official youth slam poetry team. I'm going to switch to this mic. Hello? Okay. If you don't know what that is, basically, we are a team of youth poets from the city, and we compete against other youth poets. So other cities have teams. And our biggest competition, it's an international competition, the only one of its kind, was in San Francisco in July. And we won. It's the first time Houston has won the Brave New Voices Championship, so we're really excited to put Houston on the youth poetry map. This poem is called Hot Gumbo Pot, and it's about the melting pot that is Houston.
Ariana, are you hungry?
I could eat.
Well then, Let's cook. There is love deep within the word food. My mom says
if you eat good, you'll feel good.
that food is the ultimate mediator, and no meal can beat gumbo.
Can beat hot pot.
It's a one-pot dish that comes together when people come together.
It's not just soup.
It's soul, and my soul longs to know if I can
Eats my way.
beats my way through history. To make the food that is up in your bowl, we look for herbs deep within the ground. For our roots were ruined the pickings of slavery. We prepare seafood because my people have spent so much time crossing the sea, it starts to feel like home.
Do you smell the onion, the garlic, the bay leaf?
The meal is coming together.
We add noodles, thinly sliced meat, piles of mushrooms and leafy greens. Communal cooking is a symphony, and we use chopsticks to direct the movement. My people have been doing this for centuries, gathering at this watering hole, reuniting with family. We mix and match and take in place to make sure that
Everyone eats. In my house, this is sending another plate before everyone has had their first serving.
Cooking is our community.
And I want to cook like my grandma, but she doesn't use any recipes. Recipes offer replication.
And repetition means nothing to people who have only experienced inconsistency from the law. As immigrants,
As enslaved, my ancestors received the receipts of other people's meals, telling them that this is what we must pay to keep America satisfied.
over generations, we've been forced to find the right flavors for America's palates to be the dish that everyone likes.
Because America doesn't see one pot and think of a meal to be shared. No.
America sees one pot and thinks homogenized.
Things assimilate, things that's too spicy, things water it down, but gumbo requires love. The most basic secret ingredient that is hard to find here.
Stores won't stock what is not in demand.
Instead, they stockpile chemicals, preservatives, and dyes.
We demand you see beyond that artificial food, that artificial community.
Listen to our hearts so you can measure with yours, because family is who you share your meals with. And community is who will risk the cuts, the bruise, the beef, the tears, the blood, the scrapes to put food on your plate. It might be painful to stomach the weight of the past.
To set the table for future generations. But my family sits in the presence. When they say I love you, it sounds like Nichir Lama, have you eaten yet? It sounds like
Baby, you know there's food in the kitchen.
there are things that recipe books can't imitate.
Because no one pot is the same. No one poet is the same.
Watch how we melt together. And while they may taste different, gumbo
Hot pot
conjures memories,
carries struggles, captures love. Ariana, are you still hungry?
Nah, we ate.
Good afternoon. I think that shows that we're in good hands with the future, with the youth and the next generations. Thank you very much. That was wonderful, both of them. We are here this afternoon, and so great to see all of you join us today, to talk about a subject matter that probably is one that is becoming more interesting every day. Out of many, one: immigration, hope, and humanity. And it is the humanity part that I think really needs to be talked about and held up and have some light shined upon it, because we have dehumanized a whole group of people in this whole immigration understanding and movement. Immigration brings up strong emotions throughout the history of this country. Stories of immigrants and our common humanity we talk a lot about, but many of us really don't understand. I equate it to the days of slavery and how one was able to dehumanize a group of people, and therefore one was able to do anything to that group of people. It seems that's what we're doing now to some of our immigrants and migrants. So this is a very important and timely discussion. It is one that we should have, and we need to do more of these forums around the city and around the state to get people to really understand what we're talking about. it is one of those things that brings cognitive, affective, and emotional feelings in how people think about the other. And it really is truly about the other. And so we wanted to have a couple speakers today that understand this question of otherness very deeply, because they've worked in the area, in the field for many, many years, and personal experiences that we'll hear in our second presentation also. So our first presenter this evening is Charles Foster, chairman of Foster LLP, recognized as one of the best lawyers in America. He is an expert on immigration. He's a thought leader. He's a community leader. He's a servant leader. Received his JD from the University of Texas in Austin. He was senior immigration advisor to President George W. Bush in both the 2000 campaign and the 2004 campaign. And he also was immigration policy advisor to Barack Obama in the 2008 campaign, which says a lot and shows you his understanding. His community involvement is a long list: Interfaith Ministries, Asian Society, Hobby Center for Public Policy, Holocaust Museum. If you read it on the online, the bio, which was the short bio, by the way, you get the full understanding of some of the great things that he's been involved in and does. But for today's purposes, I am just happy to call him my friend, someone that I've known and worked with in this community. I understand his passion, his commitment, his dedication, his integrity, his character. And one of the things that a hallmark of the work that we're trying to do together, he and I and a whole bunch of other people across the city, is a true understanding of developing relationships with each other across all boundaries, across all definitions, across all identities. Because Charles and I have learned, as many others have learned, and I'm looking to my right because I have a bunch of mentors in this room, and so I'm really glad to see all of them here, and they're smiling because they know who they are. Stan Merrick, Pat Kiley, and Dr. McFadden, those three gentlemen right there. McFadden is the former president emeritus of the University of St. Thomas. And of course, Michelle Savino, who has kind of been my guiding mother in many ways over the years. But I say all that to say this: it really, in the end, depends on the quality and the nature of the relationship. Relationships built, nurtured, and maintained on mutual trust and respect. What we find day to day going forward with these complex issues we're trying to address, with different opinions, perspectives, and viewpoints, without that relationship, nothing happens. Because the relationships gives you the trust, and nothing happens without trust. Nothing happens without trust. So in this great city of Houston, with this great diversity, with this great multicultural, multi-this, multi-that, multi-that, we don't really know each other. We have to work hard to begin to know each other. We don't spend time with each other. The schools are all resegregated again. The worship hour, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, church, parish, temple, synagogue, or mosque is still the most segregated hour in America. Houston has diversity, but we're also the most segregated community in America, including Dr. Steve Kleinberg, who was here. And we're also the most gated community in America. So we have to work on ourselves to get to know the other, who's right here next to us, our neighbor, let alone those who are coming to us for compassion and humanity in the form of the immigrant and the migrants. They're human beings, and we have to learn how to respect the essence of their human beingness. So we've asked Charles to give his wonderful perspective and context on this issue because he's been working at it for many, many years, and then we'll follow our next speaker. Charles, is all yours.
I tell you, I thought following those two ladies was going to be hard, but it's even just as hard following Larry. Larry has been a good friend, so I want to start off by thanking him for giving me this opportunity because it's such an important location. I love this building, and to be associated with the exhibition. If you've not seen the exhibition yet across the hallway of the paintings of President George W. Bush, I highly recommend that you do so. He's a remarkable painter. I told someone earlier, even Laura, by the way, Laura Pears, who worked for his father, President H.W. Bush, for many years, even if he hadn't been president, he would have been a successful artist, I believe. I want to recognize a couple of people very briefly. My law partner, Joe Pettis, who I always tell Joe I learn something from him every day. We have Brenda and Julia in the back who I work with. Larry's already mentioned Stan Merrick. Stan has been a real warrior in the fight for immigration reform. We've worked together for decades, and it's always a privilege. And speaking of President Bush, I see my friend Eugene Lee. Eugene has a tie because he headed the Limbeck effort to build as the construction team for the George H.W. Bush Monument downtown Houston. And I thought, I was so flattered that he came here to hear me today, and he brought his entire family. And I thought, well, that's really a big deal, until I realized his daughter, Adrienne, was one of the two poet laureates speaking. And you girls did wonderful, so congratulations. So this is a vast, important topic of immigration, and I'm going to make some preliminary remarks, and then we're going to have a conversation with my co-panelists. But yeah, on one hand, we are, well, let me get back to the fact that we're associated with President George W. Bush across the hall. I've done a lot of things in my life, in my career, but one of them was when I had the opportunity and was asked by then Governor and candidate George W. Bush to be his advisor on immigration. That would have been a big deal for anyone who practiced immigration law to be able to have a voice and opportunity to interface and give advice to someone that everyone thought had a wonderful chance of being nominated, getting the Republican nomination, and then being elected president. So that was a real treat. But it was, most people do not realize this. When George W. Ran for president, President Bush ran, he labeled himself a compassionate conservative. And there was one, if not two, big issues for him that he focused on. One was education, but if not even immigration, if anything, was even more important, or very close second to education. And he was very, very committed to immigration reform. I've had the opportunity, as Larry said, to work for two presidents and even more would-be presidents on immigration policy. They thought they were going to be president. I thought they were going to be, but it didn't turn out that way. But of all of them, he was the one that prioritized immigration. He was going to make that his number one or number two priority, which is very important if you're going to be president of the United States, because you're lucky if you get any modern day president's lucky to get one or two things passed. So that was critical. And so I would say, I've said often that we have never been closer to passing a major, large-scale, comprehensive immigration reform legislation, something that I worked on then the early morning of September the 11th, 2001. President Vicente Fox had been on the White House lawn a few days earlier. President had a lot of goodwill on both sides of the aisle, and it was pretty heady at that time with the impulse about getting something done. And of course, as that morning passed, it all came to an end on the morning of 9/11. I often joke that after that, in fact, it was so bad that Senator Feinstein wanted to deport all foreign students from the United States. I was told by the then chairman of the Judiciary Committee that immigration reform legislation was DOA, dead on arrival, let's don't travel. Let's don't even send it over here. But what was that all about? We are a nation of immigrants. That's the title of the other president of the United States that really focused on immigration. That would have been John F. Kennedy. who was almost entirely motivated by immigration. His maternal grandfather, Fitzgerald, ran for public office because of the way Irish immigrants were treated or maligned in Boston. And so we are, and it's frequently said, a nation of immigrants. Immigrants have built America. Everyone in this room could tell me their own immigrant story, just like we heard from Ariana about her great-grandmother history. And we're all proud of that. And yet, we're today, oh, by the way, I didn't introduce my good friend, an immigrant, successful immigrant cardiologist, Bridget Lee, who is my ophthalmologist. And behind her, another great friend of mine, Imtihan Jada, cardiologist. So, but we're ambivalent about immigration. We talk about being a nation of immigrants, and I often say every immigrant group, they're so glad they got here, but they want to pull up the bridge behind them. That they got here, thank God, but this next generation of immigrants, they're different. They're not like us. They don't have the same ethics or work history, the same religion, whatever it is. So we've always been, throughout our history, Joe and I are going to give a speech in a couple of weeks about the immigration history of America. And you could trace that history in one simple sentence. Throughout my career and throughout the history of America, it's progressively become more and more restrictive. And so we're very ambivalent because we say we welcome immigrants, and it's frequently when we talk about the large number of undocumented immigrants, we say those people should go back and come in legally, and there's no recognition that we have a highly, highly restrictive legal immigration system, so that for the most part, when you say go back and come in legally, you're asking someone to do something that is totally impossible. And yet, so I would say objectively, the conditions for immigration reform are very positive because our economy needs more people, more workers at the top of the food chain, at the bottom of the food chain. As Stephen Kleinberg, that Larry referred to, always joked that we guys are not producing enough children. So we're below the replacement rate. That means we're dying faster than we're having children. We would be sort of our economy and everything would be going in the wrong direction, but for immigration. And ironically, a lot of that is illegal immigration that we still depend upon. Think about it. The given figures, 11 million is probably over 12 million now. That are all these people. Most of those people have been here for decades working. And what would we do if we could put all our resources in deporting them from the United States? By the way, everyone at certain level recognizes that. Very few politicians run on the grounds that we're going to deport everyone here. It's much easier to say we're going to do all these things at the border because there's a certain realization if we were to remove everyone here undocumented that it would destroy the American economy. Yet it's totally unfair to leave people here for decades not knowing from one day to the next that they could be detained and removed from the United States. So we must do something. And I'm going to conclude because we're going to have a conversation in a second with the fact that we're probably further away than we have been in many decades from actually passing any good immigration legislation. And one of those reasons is what's happening on the southern border. There is a perception, and maybe to a certain extent a reality, that the southern border is out of control. Therefore, when you talk to elected officials, which I do on a regular basis, even the good ones, they will tell you, I agree with you, everything you say, Charles, but I can't vote that way because I will be primaried, someone will run against me, or as one of our senators who's fairly reasonable on this issue will say, I can't do that until there's a perception that we have the border under control. And for the sake of time, maybe we can talk a little bit about that more in our discussion. But I just want to thank you all for coming. And again, if you've not seen the exhibition across the hall, I encourage you to do so. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to introduce Jeanne Celestine Lakin, and she is the award-winning author of A Voice in the Darkness and an inspirational national speaker who provides insight and guidance to those lost in life. And her portrait is actually featured in the exhibition across the way. Jeanne's journey from a child survivor of the Rwandan genocide to a celebrated human rights advocate has captivated and inspired thousands across the nation. Today, Jeanne has been appointed chairwoman for the International Survivors of Trafficking Advisory Council, acting as a force against global human trafficking. Her contributions have influenced high-level United Nations events, furthering the cause of justice on an international stage. Please come up. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Give me a second. I forgot to put in a password, and it's a long one. Christina, so this is probably the third time I've been here in this in Houston Public Library, and it feels, I think as I was coming in, I said it just feels like so grounding every time I come here. There's something about it that when I came in this library for the first time, I met President Bush in this room. I don't know if it was in this room, but it looked kind of similar. It might have been downstairs. But it was, in that moment, I felt like I needed to have a little bit more of advocacy when it comes to immigration reform. So it started here. I don't know where it's ending. I've done a whole lot of stuff ever since. But again, I'm super excited to be here with you. I'm glad everybody's here in this room. After Larry spoke, introducing Charles, and after Charles spoke, I feel like, wow. So to go after him and also after our poet, it's very humbling. When I received the invitation, I was very excited to be here. And then I started reading both Larry and Charles's bios. I was like, what am I going to be doing here? Would I be able to contribute? Would I be able to say anything that is of value because of the wonderful work that they have done? And so I started getting out of my mind, of course, because, I mean, honestly, the work you've done in the community, your embodiment for humanity is just so admirable and remarkable for our community, and you continue to do this as well. So again, I said, you know what, let me not be nervous, let me give it a shot. I might have a couple words for you that will encourage you, that would empower you to be on this journey of advocacy as we are. I love what the title of this event is. It's about immigration. Immigration is hope and humanity. And that word of humanity, just like Larry, it really holds a lot meaning. As a survivor of Rwandan genocide, you see the humanity just crumble right in front of you, and to have people who embody that, it just brings the hope that we need. So as you heard, I came to this nation when I was 14 years old, and 14 years old, I did not speak English. I remember being on a plane, and the flight attendant asked me what I wanted to eat. She was giving options, and I couldn't understand the choices because I didn't speak English. And then she gave me a choice, and then I heard the word tomato. And I said, okay, tomato could be, it sounds like French, spoke French. So I said, oh, tomato, please. And she brought me a can of soup that was cold. And I was like, that was so gross. So in that moment, I realized I needed to really do everything possible. If I needed to integrate in the United States, if this was going to be my new home, my new country, that I needed to do everything possible to learn the language. And so when I get nervous, I speak super fast. I might start speaking Kinyarwanda in the midst of, my presentation. But English is my fifth language. But I also learned that I really told myself that I needed to do everything possible in order to contribute as an immigrant to this country. And I remember being a 14-year-old in middle school. I think I was taken back a couple years because of the genocide. But every morning as a student in middle school, I hold my head on my chest and pledge allegiance. At the beginning, I didn't understand what it meant. But when I understood the meaning, I proudly, every morning, said the Pledge of Allegiance. Then 14 years later, when I became a United States citizen, I remember standing in front of immigration judge, 2012. And when I said that Pledge of Allegiance, I even felt that there was something magical about that. Because now, after 14 years, I was a US citizen that had a responsibility to give back. I felt a sense of urgency to be able to support others, to be able to encourage and empower young people, whether it was in education or encouraging them to pursue their dreams and goals. So then as Christina shared as well, I wanted to take the fact that I survived the genocide to take it to even on not only in the United States, but to a national level and international. So I became a chairwoman for human trafficking, where I work with a lot of survivor leaders across the world. And we know for sure that when you have migration, whether it's war-torn zone countries or there are conflicts that are happening, we are seeing what's happening in Ukraine. We're also seeing what's happening around the world. There's about more than 27 countries right now with wars. There's global warming, if you believe that it is. People are going to continue to migrate. And so what I've advocated for is immigration policy that really embodies humanity. I believe in protecting our borders. I believe really having a country that is protected, but we need to put in place policies that really have humanity attached to them. Because when you have somebody, I met so many women fleeing Ukraine, and it just breaks your heart because you know they're fleeing a war that they have nothing to do with what is happening right now. I've met children who are stranded, helpless, across the world. But they're there, and if I can give them anything, it's that encouragement and hope. So let me take you back a little bit and give you, share about my lived experience and about myself. I wrote this wonderful book with my husband, Paul, over there. Honey, say hi. He's being shy right now. We wrote this book together, and if you haven't had a chance, I would encourage you to read it because President Bush had a copy of this as well. When I came in the room, I had a signed copy, and I was shaken because I have never really, I loved President Bush, and I'll get to that story later on. But surviving the Rwandan genocide was one of the most horrific experiences that any human, let alone a 9-year-old child, could go through. I grew up in a Christian family. My parents supported everybody in the community. My husband is going to law school, but somehow my father was elected as a mediator in the community, someone who was able to take issues from both sides and look at them in a way without judgment, but really to bring the people together. And so I lead with what I've learned to be that embodiment of humanity from my parents. My mother, remember her just having baskets of food for poor children and poor families. We visited children in the hospitals, in our orphanage homes. She will give the last clothes that she will have on her back to the poor people. And that's how I learned to lead. But in 1994, on April 7th, Rwandan genocide, actually prior to Rwandan genocide didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't something that was abrupt. It was a genocide that was very carefully planned and organized. Machetes had been purchased and imported into Rwanda specifically to kill the Tutsis. So go from a family of 10, family where I had everything a child could have dreamed of, to having to live in the bushes. On that April 7th, it was the day I said goodbye to my parents, and that was the final goodbye. I hid in the bushes with my 3-year-old twin sisters. We have a 6-year-old little boy, and he's very cute and handsome, and he's feisty. But I look at him and think of the months, those 3 months I was in the bushes, hiding with my 3-year-old twin sisters, the questions they asked. Why are we here in the bushes? We drank rainwater, we ate plants, we ate grass. If you have grandkids or have children, try to feed them some grass tonight. I'm just kidding. But that's what we had to eat. We ate berries if we found those. For the course of 3 months, it was just rough because we were running, hiding, while women were being raped all around Rwanda, the countryside, in the country. So it's really, after the genocide, closer to 3 months of the genocide, and at that point I had already seen my father being killed with machetes in clubs. I had witnessed my mother's death as well, my 3-week-old little brother. And I was left with nothing but hope. And coming from a Christian family, my parents taught me how to pray. So I really believe that the prayers somehow is what saved me. But at the end of that genocide, I had been taken in by a man who captured me with my 3-year-old twin sisters. Not only did he physically and emotionally and verbally abused me, he also sexually abused me as a 9-year-old. And then he decided that he would take me to Congo. We walked all the way from Rwanda to Congo and lived in a refugee camp. And that was also another task that was tough. But it was in the Congo where he negotiated with other men to sell me to adult men, to sell me into marriage. At that point, I was a 10-year-old. And as I heard the conversation going back and forth about how much money that I was going to be exchanged for, just as like an animal or an object, I decided that I would actually run back to Rwanda. I would go anywhere in the world at that point because I needed to be safe. And so I went to now I'm within UN, as you've heard. I went to UNICEF so many times, over and over again, but there was barriers. Somebody would turn me away, and I'll go back to the same abuse. But then I ran back to Rwanda, where I was a homeless kid. I go from having everything a child could have dreamed of to being a homeless kid in the streets. So, maybe fast forward this, I get to the United States as a 14-year-old, and again with the mindset of learning English and being able to make this place my home. And America has given me the opportunity. I am an example of what it really looks like when we talk about American dream. And being here, and again where it started in this room, when I received the invitation to come and meet President Bush with his beautiful wife, at first I thought, there's no way President Bush wants to talk to me. I'm just a regular citizen here, and he wants to have dinner with me and my husband. So we met here, and he said he wanted to paint my portrait. And again, as they confirmed, there's a beautiful portrait When I went to Dallas after President Bush had painted it, he said, I'm afraid to show it to you because I don't know if he did a great job, but he has done a remarkable job. He's done such a beautiful painting. As Charles said, he could have been an artist for life, but he's just has such a good, great heart. I love President Bush. I used to joke with my husband every time we went to Dallas to speak. I would say that I want to go have a cup of coffee with President Bush, and my husband would go, that's not going to happen. But then the dream came true. We sat here, we had a conversation. I remember when I walked into the room for the first time, he got up and his wife and just gave us a big hug. And that shows you the sense of embodiment for humanity with President Bush. They love people. And honestly, there's that trust of loving and showing people, no matter what walk of life you're coming from. And so to do the work that I do today, as I am a manager of disability services at Lone Star College as well, one of the largest colleges here in Houston. I've been able to do a lot of work on an international level now with human rights and advocating for human trafficking, to eradicate human trafficking, because we're seeing many women and children who are suffering because of the migration, again, from war-torn countries. And so it is such a blessing. I've prayed, and some days I ask God what it is that I need to do, how much more that I need to do. And God has opened so many doors for me to be able to give maybe an input to encourage others to lead the best way I can. And so I know we're going to have a discussion, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but thank you so much for having me today.
I'm going to ask you to chime in a little bit on your experience. Thank you both for your presentation. It was really wonderful, and I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us to kind of lay it out. Charles, I'm just going to go straight to the heart of the matter. This is truly an issue that is grounded in politics. And we can talk about it in many other ways and terms, but unless there is some attention to the policy changes that needs to happen, that has to happen, we're going to be having this same conversation in the next who knows how many years. So where do things stand now? Is there any hope for any piece of legislation, any compromise, anything coming forward?
Is this
Yeah,
working?
it's on.
I am a natural-born optimist.
Charles, a little closer.
I'm a natural-born. Well, that's good. I'm a natural-born optimist, but I have to say, objectively, I'm looking at Stan because we've gone through this ups and downs for so long, that you have to say objectively we are further away from passing any good immigration legislation, reform legislation, since the morning of 9/11. What's happened is, I'll pick up, this historically was not a Republican-Democrat divide. In fact, I'm very bipartisan about this. But you could say objectively that under President Reagan, President George H.W. Bush, Republican nominees like John McCain, even Romney, and certainly George W. Bush, they were very positive about immigration reform. They saw the benefits of immigration, and they could balance that with enforcement. But again, since the morning of 9/11, the parties have been very divided, and there's a wing, I don't want to be overtly political, of the Republican Party that is against anything at all that would bring about comprehensive immigration reform. I did work for President Obama. We almost got that passed. It passed, a good bill passed through the Senate. And Speaker John Boehner, who I really liked, he worked behind the scenes to bring his caucus over to support that legislation. And then a particular U.S. senator sort of killed that by labeling everything amnesty. So I'm going to end on this just to answer your question, because I am an optimist. And so I've come to the conclusion that we have to focus on our southern border. And as someone that's very pro-immigrant, I'm sort of torn. But when you look at our southern border, what we have is really a humanitarian crisis. And our immigration laws were never written or designed to deal with that crisis. So unfortunately, with large, unprecedented numbers of people applying for asylum, in which I understand why they're doing that. They're fleeing not the terrible violence, but they're still fleeing violence, extreme poverty. They would do what anyone logically would do. And when they get to the border, they're applying for asylum, and those cases wind up before an immigration judge. But the hard truth is, they technically do not qualify for asylum. They're not being singled out and persecuted individually based upon their political activity. And the proof of the pudding is the vast majority, 90+% of those cases ultimately will be denied. In the interim, what has happened, and this was in the newspaper today with, is it Mayor Adams of New York, saying it's the biggest crisis, that it's going to cost them $12 billion. There's legislation, therefore, to give asylum seekers greater rights, benefits, but indirectly that's actually incurring that. But at the end of that picture, we know what's going to happen. Those cases are going to be denied. And in the interim, it has destroyed any prospects for any immigration. Anyone that wants to help the dreamers, the so-called the DACA beneficiaries, that's dead. Anyone that wants more guest worker visas, anyone that wants to do everything that Stan has called for decades, that's not going to happen until we deal with that. So I'm going to end on this note. It's a long answer. I've been working to develop legislation that would be combined with DREAM Act legislation that would actually be fairer, more humane, and give more people the right to asylum, but those hearings would be held at the border within a shorter period of time. So more people would get asylum, but it would also send the message that we have to deal with the humanitarian aspects in a very different way.
Man, I know you got something to say about this, so. Oh, guys, microphone.
Sure. Okay, there we go. Well, I'm Stan, and I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an educator. I'm a construction worker. I came up hanging sheetrock like my dad. Our family came over from Czechoslovakia in the 1800s, carpenters out of Olomouc, Czechoslovakia. And we built over the last 85 years a very large construction company. We have several thousand employees in about 8 cities. We do projects like the Methodist Hospital, the Walter Tower, the airports, the Cowboy Stadium, Mercedes-Benz. So we work a lot of people. And from day one in the United States, immigrants came in to do the work. The Irish, the Italians, our kids, we love them, but we all want our kids to go to college. We even took out the vocational training in our high schools 20 years ago because everybody was going to go to college, but not everyone does go to college. So the likelihood of an American-born kid going into the construction industry, hanging sheetrock, doing roofing, doing insulation, it's not happening. It's certainly not in the numbers that are needed. So these immigrants are coming. They've been coming forever. And the last 30 years, since 1986 or longer than that, there's no legal way for them to come. So they come and they go to work because it's so easy with our government and our system that if you want an ID, just go to the flea market. You can get a Social Security card, you can get a driver's license, doesn't mean it's correct. You go on a job site and you go to work. And for a long time, there were a lot of undocumented workers who were paying Social Security that they'd never get. But what has happened in the last 10 years, and I wrote a book, it's on Amazon, called Deconstructed, is that the system is so broken that people are coming now and they're not employees. They're independent subcontractors like an Uber driver. So they pay no taxes, payroll taxes. Now there's ad valorem taxes and sales taxes, but no, payroll taxes are only about, 14, 15 cents of every dollar towards our Social Security. I see a few folks in there like me that are getting their Social Security. So the construction industry as it is today, for many trades, not mechanical or electrical or plumbing because they're licensed, but concrete, drywall, roofing, these workers are coming, they're working off the books, they're not paying taxes, and we have a very simple solution Charles and I have been advocating for. It's called ID and tax. The government just needs to let us hire them, put them on our payrolls, pay taxes, provide workman's comp, provide safety training, background check. They don't want to vote, they don't want welfare, they just want to work. And it's so simple, ID and tax. And if you'd really like to know more about this, if you Google 3 words, rational middle immigration, we've got a series of YouTube videos and podcasts that explain all of this in great detail. So please watch them, send them to your friends, like them on your Facebook page, because it's the voters that are going to solve this issue, and it's business. Businesses need to stand up and say, we want to do the right thing. People in boardrooms, the boards of Google, the boards of Amazon, need to stand up and say, we want legal workers on our jobs, paid correctly, protections, things like that, and we'll solve this issue without the government's help. So, hope
Thank you, Stan. Back to the humanitarian side of this. As I listen to your story, people that you engaged with along the way who wanted to do horrible things, from selling you off as a child bride to all the threats, it seems to follow a pattern of not only in the area of the world where you've come from, but the stories I've heard from those other countries that are coming to this country, that we can do what we can do when we get here to America, but the other countries, perhaps with the United States guidance, need to take into consideration what certain elements of their society are doing to aid this crisis across the country. There seems to be no ramifications for those that are trafficking in human beings, and yet it just keeps coming. That's why everybody's trying to flee from those countries that are doing it. Do you see any, in the work that you've been doing and the stuff you've been following, any hope that some of that is changing across the diaspora?
Thank you. Now I have to, let's figure out which one works.
They're both working. Go ahead.
Thank you for that question. I'm very hopeful. Like Charles, I'm more of an optimistic person, but I also have, I'm seeing more and more. When we think about human trafficking is a business, unfortunately, and where there's a demand, there's going to be supply. People are going to figure out how to bring in or lure some kids, or when a war breaks out, you're going to have people fleeing. And again, like what you see is young people, and usually women and children, being played upon, being exploited in these kind of settings. Because if you have smugglers benefiting or promising, these individuals that they're going to protect them or get them to a safe place, unfortunately, and also once they held them captive, there's a fee that they owe. So you have also, so that leads into labor exploitation as well. So I'm seeing more and more of exploitation on all levels, whether it's labor or sex trafficking. But again, we have to continue to be the advocates. We have to be those voices of reasoning. One thing that I didn't share is that I'm actually testifying before Congress on Thursday. And Charles, I might need some help from you about this. I've never testified in front of Congress on issues regarding human trafficking and also human rights issues, because it is needed. When you share lived experience, I think it really amplifies more of you bring in some content versus what we see on TV. I mean, so many people have seen Rwandan genocide on television, but they were quick to forget. Then you have a survivor like myself. I don't sit in settings and share my lived experience for fun. It's actually very tough to go through those moments, but I do it so that no child will have to live through what I lived through. No person on the planet should experience a genocide or have to be sold into marriage at a 10-year-old. So lived experiences are important. I am hopeful that the more we speak, right now we have under the ODIHR, the organization that I'm overseeing in Europe, we have 21 members, survival leaders, and their job is to really speak on their lived experiences, because we think that we can have influence in policy writing. Even this hearing that I have coming up, my hope is that I throw in my 2 cents that the policies will really be written to that embodies humanity, that looks at a human being as not the other, but as your brothers or sisters, as your fellow, human beings.
Oh, thank you. Very good. What can we do locally, Charles? How can we get people engaged, informed, and educated as to what you and Stan are trying to do and get some support? It seems to me that there is a breadth of people willing to get involved if they know all the parameters, if they know all the facts. And in this great city, we have such a breadth within just our Friday, Saturday, Sunday worship crowd, church, parish, temple, synagogue, and mosque, that somehow this message has to reach them, because in their tradition, in their theology, in their being, there is sections of their belief system that talks directly to this inhumanity as a moral and ethical question that must be addressed. And this, to me, right now, is one of the highest issues from a moral, ethical perspective that one could be involved in. Because we see what's happening on the border. We see what's happening in the insanity of the border. And so it's always the question of what will move one and get them to the movement to move from here, from the cognitive and thinking, to the feeling part, the effective of what can I do? And so we have to figure out a way to motivate that. Those videos you have are very good. That's a great start. But something's missing. Yeah, they're both working, by the way.
It's working?
Yeah, the other one's working too.
Yeah, okay. Is it working? You know, Larry, the question you're asking is one that I've asked myself for literally for decades. How do we get something passed? How do we pass something? That's a question I've asked myself for decades, and there is no easy answer. And I keep on looking at Stan, because we've been through this so many times. With Stan's help, we raised through the Greater Houston Partnership a lot of money through the construction industry and other groups to bring about immigration reform legislation, but in the end it didn't. We didn't. We even hired Miss Conway. What's her name? Kellyanne Conway. Believe it or not. Anyway, she later worked for Donald Trump as sort of as a lobbyist. I would say two things I've learned. First, you have to have a horse. I've been very involved with the partnership. It's not enough to say do something. You've got to, number one, you've got to realize this requires a legislative solution. It requires both houses of Congress, a majority in both houses, and the President of the United States. So you start with you have to have a president that's open to that, and then you've got to, through persuasion, pass something through both houses. Next, you need a horse. You need something to support. If you go to speak to decision makers and you tell them about your compassion and you won't, do something, it's easy for them not to say, well, there's nothing really to do right now, and there's nothing pending. So there's a couple of good bills that have been introduced recently. And then I hate to be unduly pessimistic, but since we're in the shadow of George W. Bush's paintings and having worked for him, after 2001, I spoke to President Bush, and he said, well, we're going to have to do this in a second term. And actually, in his second term, there was a real effort to get comprehensive immigration reform passed. And we came relatively close. And in the end, it failed. There was not enough, frankly, Republican votes to get that passed. And President George W. Bush, his reaction was very angry. Was very interesting. He was very angry, and his anger was directed toward the business community. Mm-hmm. He said, we'll never get anything passed unless the business community, and this is what Stan speaks about, unless the business community gets behind this. And following that, we had the most effective enforcement of employers' sanctions, because under the 86 Act, for the first time, all employers had to verify the status of their employees. Well, President Bush was angry, so he directed the then Immigration and Naturalization Service to go all out against employers. His attitude was, they did not support me. I will show them. They will feel the pain because they should have supported me in this legislation. So this is a long way of saying, to get something done, we won't get anything done unless there's something to pass, unless there's a specific something to support. Yeah. And I think until we can get the business community to let members of the Senate and the House know that this is really priority, it's really important. And unfortunately, that's never happened so far.
All right, it's your time, the audience. We're going to open it up to you for Q&A. Christina's going to pass the microphone around to you, and we'll take it from there. Who wants to ask the first question?
Mr. Charles, the question is, in Houston, Texas, we integrated this city because the business leaders of this city came together away from the news media in little bitty rooms or big rooms, and they said, we are not going to let happen to Houston, Texas, what have happened across the South. So I just want to let you know that to me, that is very, very important of what you said. These business leaders have to come together, and it can be done on a broader scale than just Houston, Texas. But if I may ask that question, do you see any of these boardrooms or any rooms in Houston that the business leaders are having these conversations about immigration?
Well, that's actually a very good observation, and I think you're absolutely right. What happened, the integration of Houston, it did happen in terms of legal immigration, because the business community quietly let it be known that they wanted that to happen. But to get back to what Stan said, I don't think that has happened because of the fact that all of these employees are able to work by evading immigration laws, by working as independent contractors. So all of these politicians that are saying, let's build a wall on the border, if they were really wanted to do something about it, they would say, let's close the loopholes in our employer-sanctioned provisions. Let's make it difficult for employers to hire anyone, and then the employers would get behind it. But they haven't done that because they're able to get around our immigration laws because they're not enforced internally. All of our enforcement is within 100 miles or within 10 miles, probably of the U.S.-Mexican border. There's virtually no enforcement. And so for you fellows who follow football, sort of like a football, where the defense is all up on the line, and to stop the run, but if the running back gets through, he can score a touchdown because no one's out there to stop him, and that's where we have all the defense on the border. So anyway, we agree. We have to get the business community, number one, and number two, I don't see that happening. The Greater Houston Partnership, and I've been on the board like Stan, the Greater Houston Partnership is, their heart is in the right place. They would agree with everything I've said, but they would also say, well, Charles, there's nothing going on, so we don't want to extend any effort right now because it would be fruitless. And we've got to convince them that it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Until the business community gets committed, it will never happen.
It seems like that needs to happen on the state level, though. And so is there a similar organization that is on the state level, Texas businesses, who could put pressure on the governor or whoever?
Yes, there's several very good state coalitions that I'm involved with. They're good. They have good representation, but still, I have to be candid. I don't think it's had a lot of impact on our state officials. The states actually play a relatively minor role because under the Constitution, our federal government has jurisdiction on immigration, even though Governor Abbott is trying to play a much bigger role than probably he should be doing.
My question is for Ms. Lakin. What, in your opinion, what caused the genocide to begin from the Hutu to the Tutsis? What sparked that? How did that begin, and how would that be stopped in the future?
Thank you for that question. What started the genocide was really the genocide actually would not have happened if there wasn't this ideology of hate that was forming for years. So there was a lot of propaganda campaign that led into that, feeding into these ideologies. From one point, we were just the Tutsis, just people, regular people, Tutsi as a name as anybody else in a country. Then when they divided and started calling the Tutsis things like snakes, the other, as Larry confirmed, when people started seeing and really kind of taking in this ideology of that Tutsi were no longer human, but there were snakes, there were cockroaches, there were all these other things, it was easy for somebody to pick up a machete and go kill that thing because we're no longer identified as humans. So discrimination really started a way long time ago in Rwanda. Rwandan genocide against Tutsis in 1994 was one of the probably largest, I would say, for the lack of a better word. Over 1 million people were killed in 100 days. Over 1 million people. Between 250 to 500,000 women had been raped, women and children. So how to stop this, this propaganda, I think it starts with every single individual. That's the way I see it. As somebody with faith who believes in God, we want to be able to walk across the aisle, shake hands with people who do not look like us, people who do not worship like we do, people who might look a little bit strange than we assume we are. To have that sort of conversation, because really the minute you step into that conversation with a person you might have perceived to be the other, you realize that you have so much in common with that person than you can ever imagine. And that's something that I'm continue to be reminded. It's something that we teach our own little boy to go and shake hands with other kids who he might not be, otherwise play with. So if we could have stopped the genocide in Rwanda or stopped the genocide anywhere else in the world, there was a word that kept coming after the genocide, and that was never again. But as a survivor, to hear the never again and see what is happening right now, I don't know if there's a formula to stop the genocide, but to really speak on what has happened, I think it gives people a sense that when you hear people who have been affected by it, I think it's probably the key. Because for me, as a regular citizen, I just woke up and go, I was in a home, now I'm in the bushes and hiding. For what? Over just the name. And so it's really inhumane. As a citizen of this country, I think we are divided as our politics is divided. And I would encourage everyone to really have a sense of that embodiment of humanity. Because when you think about your wants and your needs, we all want the same thing, to be accepted and to be loved, and that's it.
Thank you. So now one more hand over here I saw somewhere. All right. Over here. You got another one? Okay.
I needed to exercise. Maybe there's several people in this room that saw the movie Hotel Rwanda. And you left that movie, as I did, wanting to know more. That's why this question hit the floor today, wanting to know more. But I didn't just go home wanting to know more. I went home digging deep and finding out more. That was a good movie. But I suggest you look at the documentary about Rwanda. And the documentary that I've been showing in Houston, Texas, so people can truly understand that genocide. It's called Ghost of Rwanda. Ghost of Rwanda. Remember that, Ghost of Rwanda. I want to take this opportunity. I've never met a person from Rwanda, and I bow to you. Even though I worked with a lot of the lost boys from the Sudan. But if you really want to understand Rwanda, look at the documentary.
Right, come in, right there. Right there.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Oops. Yeah. I'm gonna go this way. Thanks. Oh, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Sabino, and I represent the Main Street Theater. And our season starts actually tomorrow with previews, and the 15th and the 14th and the 15th. But Larry wanted me to introduce our opening play, which is called What the Constitution Means to Me. And if you will indulge me, I'll read the summary of the play. 15-year-old Heidi earned her college tuition by winning constitutional debate competitions at American Legion posts across the United States. This is a hilarious, hopeful, and achingly human new play. She resurrects her feelings in order to trace the document's profound impact on women's bodies, starting with her great-great-grandmother, a mail-order bride who died under mysterious circumstances. This is a witty and searingly personal exploration. There are some elements of the play that we want our audiences to be sensitive to. It talks about domestic violence and sexual assault and human trafficking and abortion and all of its stigmatization. But of course, the Constitution is wrapped up in all of that. And so we welcome you to take advantage of this regional premiere. The play got 2 Tony nominations and had a significant run off Broadway. But probably the most significant thing to us at Main Street Theater is that on Sunday, the 24th of September, after the matinee, Larry is going to lead a discussion with several other panelists and have an open session with the audience to address your questions about what the Constitution means to you. So I hope you'll join us.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay. I thought that was important because what the Constitution means to you, to me, to us individually, plays a lot into the discussion today about immigration. It also plays into the reality of America's understanding of humanity and how we all come together under this wonderful thing called the Republic, if we can keep it, to begin to understand how we need to together change some things. I carry this, and I've been carrying it forever. I carry a copy of the Constitution in my pocket. Must be this side, yes. And I've been carrying a copy of the Constitution in my coat pocket ever since I was a district director for Congressman Mickey Leland. These little pamphlets of the Constitution are available free of charge from any congressional office. Any congressional office has tons of these usually in the office. Just go by and ask them to pick up one. You can probably call them and ask them to mail you some. All right? We have not read this document. We do not know this document. It is amazing when I ask people, how many of you have ever read the Constitution? I'm not going to put y'all on the spot in this room and ask for a show of hands, but I can tell you it would be very few people. That is part of our problem. We're trying to address certain issues without the full understanding of the connection historically as to why those issues exist in our own Constitution. And so it is a challenge to go forward to do that. So let me end with these quick closing thoughts. And then we want to invite everybody to go across the hall to view the exhibit. This is an exercise, it seems to me. We look to the light that shines out of the darkness of what we've been talking about. The darkness helps you to begin to understand and recognize the light. You do not finish the work in your lifetime. That's not the way it works. You add to the deposit of hopefully helping others to make sense as to why they should come out of the darkness and get involved into the light. In this battle of forgiving and remembering, we are called after a deeper exploration of the heart. We're called to play a greater part. After a deeper exploration of the heart, we're all called to play a greater part. We all have a role to play in this. We all can play that role. So we're just so grateful that you chose to spend this afternoon with us around this topic and subject. It has been recorded. It is archived. You can pull it up on the Houston Public Library's website. You can share it with your friends. You can send them the link. And so we can spread the word of what we did here this afternoon with your help and your involvement. Again, let me thank you both, Allison, for doing this, and all of the rest of you for your thoughtful questions. And have a great afternoon. But please go view the exhibit. Thank you.